All right.
Is this Joe Levine?
That's Joe and Louise, Anthony
Wow.
too.
Wow. Boy, we haven't seen you since you left Raleigh. That's great.
Good to see folks.
Yes, nice to you to be with us.
We have a couple more folks that are getting on. So give them a chance. And
we have to use a microphone here, but hello, Judith. I haven't seen you since you left for Raleigh too. That's Marsh Hardy here and Cynthia Gallion over there.
Oh, Marsh, oh, wonderful.
very good. All right. Is there a dial-in number? That is a great question. All right. Okay. Great. Well, we will go ahead and get started with a couple of housekeeping items while people are still jumping in. My name is Janet Bauckham. I'm one of the ministers at Highland United Methodist Church and helped to get this set up. And I'm going to help serve as a moderator to work with Judith this evening. In a sense of full disclosure, we are recording this evening so that it can be shared after tonight. It is mostly going to focus on Judith, as you might imagine, and her presentation, but just wanted you to know that. It typically works best in this kind of environment if most folks remain muted while the presentation is going on. That way background noise doesn't detract from it. The chat box, I hope you have found, is going to be the easiest way to communicate if you're having any difficulty, to let us know that you're here, say hi and how you found us. And also when we move towards our Q&A session, to be able to ask questions. If they come up to you at any point in the presentation, go ahead and jot a question down in the chat box and we will get those to Judith at the appropriate time. Joe, would you like to say a couple words of introduction for our speaker?
Yes, I will. It's great to have all of you with us tonight. For this third Tuesday meeting again, we were scheduled to have Judith speak with us in March, and that was canceled, and then again in April. So it's glad that she wanted to be willing to talk with us with a Zoom meeting this evening. Judith is a North Carolina State University Emeritus Professor of English. Her specialties are in medieval English literature and teaching expository literature. Before coming to Raleigh, she was at Colby College at Brandeis University. She's been active in Israel and Palestine issues since 1982, working with several organizations in the area, including Jewish Voice for Peace, Abrahamic Initiative on the Middle East, and the Coalition for Peace with Justice. Last year, Judith made a trip to Palestine, and tonight she's going to talk about that trip and tell us all about it. So with that, I'll let Judith take over.
Great. Can I share screen now?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go. Good. So I'm delighted to be here under the auspices of Peace Action. I've been interested in that organization for a long time. It's taken on the great existential issue of the over-militarization of the world. And so it's important that there are groups that can work on that. I first met Joe when we were organizing against the buildup for the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. And when we lost that war, we switched to thinking about Israel, Palestine. This is so, and I've been thinking about that ever since. In fact, I've been active in one small way or another since '82 on that issue. And but this November 2019 was the first time I had ever gone. So that's the trip that I want to start by telling you about, plus the aftermath, because when I got back, I was reading very intensely books that I'd heard about while I was there, and then events kept happening that were relevant. So I say 2 + 7 days was the trip, but things have been very intense on this issue ever since I got back. So there's more than just the trip that ended on the 16th of November. It kept going. It keeps going.
Judith, if you select play from start in the upper left corner of your screen, I think that will give the full screen of your presentation. Upper left corner, play from start. Give that a shot.
How about that? How about that?
There you go.
Good. That's perfect from my point of view. So I'm going to talk to you about the trip and its aftermath. And this is my table of contents. I'm going to talk about the issue of diversity in that territory. The history of exclusion that has plagued it from the beginning, and the infrastructure that was created to keep the separation of peoples, and then various ways to aspire to inclusion, and then the current events that I was saying have kept happening since I got back. We'll get to the right of return, and then there are a couple of things that embody the sharing of this land between the two people with equal rights. And one of them is an intentional village that's mixed. And the other one I found out about this afternoon, because there's some people sequestered in a hotel in Jerusalem after having recovered from the coronavirus, and they're together, and Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, seculars, Muslims, and they're cooperating in Hotel Corona. I thought that was too much fun to let go. So I put in a slide about that too. And then we'll draw some conclusions, and we'll have Q&A, and also see, please, because I know that there are people here who have been working on this issue for a very long time. So I just don't want to be posing as the one to answer questions. If people have comments, I'd love to hear them. And I've taken a lot of pictures out of this presentation so that we could concentrate more intently on some of the important issues. So I didn't delete them. So they're behind, they're the very end of the PowerPoint. And if in the discussion, we need some of the pictures that are lurking in the background, we'll go find them. I wanted to talk about diversity. Israel claims to be proud of its demographic diversity. It talks about its rich, vibrant culture that's created by this diversity. And yet it does destroy Palestinian cultural centers and theaters. So there's some part of its vibrant culture that it blocks out. But it does, there is a great deal of diversity in this parcel of land. You can see that there's diversity among the Jews. There are different kinds of Jews, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and also in terms of religious feelings, there's a great deal of diversity about that too. So a percentage Orthodox, a percentage atheist, a percentage very secular Jews, and then the Mizrahi Jews that come from Arab countries, Jews that come from Spanish and North African countries. There are Black people. There are Druze. There are Christians. So I won't read you all the numbers, but I want you to get a sense of the different kinds of people who are in the territory. Here's a Black person, probably African, contemplating some of the amazing fruit that's available in Jerusalem. Some women getting off a bus, many of them probably Muslim, wearing hijabs, but not all. Hasidic men, I confess I stole this picture from the web. These guys are in Brooklyn, but I did see people in that kind of garb in Jerusalem. This is an Orthodox Jew. He is from America, but he's in Israel now. And he came to be a disciple of a Naturei Karta rabbi. The Naturei Karta are a kind of an Orthodox Jew that does not support the Israeli state, the creation of the state of Israel. They think that Jews should not be in a state of Israel in the Holy Land until the Messiah comes. And since he hasn't, they don't think that there should be a state of Israel in that territory. They've been there before the creation of the state. Many of them stayed. So they live the contradiction. So this was the group that I was traveling with for much of the time, visiting a Naturei Karta rabbi in Jerusalem, Meyer Hirsch. He's in the middle. The group is arranged around him. Just to his right is Miko Peled, who put the group together. All the way to his left is Umar Al-Gabari, who was our tour guide in Tel Aviv, Yafo, who came up to Jerusalem to visit the rabbi with us. He works with an Israeli organization called Zokrot, which means memory, which is dedicated to keeping track of what there was before the founding of the state and what remains. It's a great website, and they have great guides. I'm the one with the walker and the pre-COVID haircut. I mean, I guess we all do at that point, but. So I said that Miko Peled was the person who put the group together. So I'll tell you a little bit about him. He is an activist promoting the creation of a single state in Israel and Palestine. He wrote the book, The General's Son, because he is one. His father was an important general who prosecuted the war in '67, the Six-Day War that conquered the Peace of Jerusalem, the Judea and Samaria, the Golan Heights, the Sinai. And his father is fascinating to read about, because he then, after being successful in this war, became a proponent of the two-state solution. So he moved. He also became a professor of Arabic literature, a man of parts. So Miko was born into this military culture. He then lost a niece to a suicide bomber in a cafe, and set out to find out why they hate us. You know, that question that people who are subject to violence sometimes set out to answer. And the book tells about what he discovered when he went to find out who the Palestinians are. His second book is called Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5, people who were arrested for supporting a terrorist organization because they were mistaken, I believe. So the book is called Injustice. Miko has a podcast, and he interviews Omar al-Ghabari of Zokrot in the second episode. So if you want to find out more about Miko and about Omar, it's available. Miko's website is called Miko Peled. So you can find him. So now I'll tell a little bit of the story of the creation of Israel. Since before 1948, there was ethnic cleansing going on. The Palestinians call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. And it's the story of the attempts to decrease the number of Palestinians in the land. So there were buildings destroyed, villages destroyed, houses demolished. People not allowed to return to their destroyed villages. There's a structure of law that supports all of this and makes it possible for Palestinians who were chased out, expelled, to return. In 1959, Israel passed the law of return, which applies to people like me, who were not born there, but have some Jewish ancestry. Not exactly, very European Jewish ancestry. I've done 23andMe, and I can see that there's no Semitic in me. My brother has a little bit, but I'm pretty much European. Yet I have the right to return when Palestinians who were born there do not. There's lots of international law that says they do, but in Israeli law, they don't. I'm going to get to Israel's nation state law later, so I'll go ahead now. So here are some of the details about the Nakba. This is focusing on one village called Lifta. Tells you a little bit about what's destroyed. Little bit remaining. The Israeli Land Administration plans to sell it, what's left, to developers, probably to create housing for Jews. The Lifta Society is a coalition of people who are trying to preserve what's there and defend its legacy. Tell people about it. Another village, Qualunya, has a similar society, and they try to do things. They clean the cemetery. They have some meals there. They organize conferences so people can learn about it. Palestinians have the right to resist occupation, and there have been some famous intifadas in the past that have done a certain amount of damage to Israelis. I mentioned the suicide bombing that got Miko's niece. Insofar as there is international law that supports the ability of occupied people to resist. Much is done non-violently, not all. So as a result of the wish to exclude, Israel has built I'm calling it the infrastructure of exclusion. Jeff Helper, whom you will meet later, calls it the matrix of control. Physical things that create separation. This is a great picture taken by Miko from the place, one of the places that I was staying. In my few days there, I stayed in 3 different places. And this was a wonderful guest house run by French nuns in Jerusalem with a great vantage point. And I couldn't get to the places where I got the best advantage. So he took some pictures with my camera, and this is one of them. I was fascinated to see that there's construction going on. Israel had conquered and then annexed the East Jerusalem. By international law, they're not supposed to be building there, but they're doing something. I'm not sure exactly what. Here's more building. This is a new settlement that was plunked down right next to the French nuns on their hilltop, a new settlement. This is an apartment building for Jews in Jerusalem, a new apartment building. Israel's building, it's a dynamic, vibrant place with money, and they're doing a lot of building, and the housing is all for Jews. An important piece of the infrastructure of control, these red signs are all over where Israel crosses into what it was called Area A by the Oslo process. And you can see it says, the entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden, dangerous to your lives, and is against Israeli law. So if you go there, if you are an Israeli Palestinian, for instance, and you have relatives, you're not supposed to go there and visit them. But if you're a Jew, you're not, this is part of this infrastructure of separation. This is the entrance to a refugee camp. Refugee camps are also part of the infrastructure of exclusion. This one is called Aida, and its symbol is the house key, a very important icon for Palestinians, who many of them have keys to houses that they can no longer go back to. And so Aida has made itself a giant house key as its symbol. This is the Watchtower in Aida. Within the military presence within the refugee camp. This is a little boy, a 13-year-old, who was killed in disturbances in 2015. I think they were over worries about access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. And he was not part of the disturbances, but he was watching with a friend. The friend got shot in the leg. He got shot in the chest and died. Part of American resistance to the infrastructure of control is this bill by Senator Betty McCollum, which has not been passed, but is gathering some sponsors, which defends the human rights of Palestinian children living under Israeli military occupation. Obviously, they need it. It's an important bill because it goes on to say, to point out that military units that aid in depriving Palestinians of their rights should be deprived of aid from the United States government. It invokes United States law to stop military aid from going to the wrong place. It has not passed. It's not getting a lot of sponsors. But this letter has been signed in the House, and it's a letter to Pompeo, Secretary of State, which does something similar, urging the administration to oppose the displacement of Palestinians and ensure that U.S. equipment not be used in home demolitions in the West Bank. I highlighted some of the names, some of the usual suspects, one of which is David Price, my representative in District 4 of North Carolina. Also, the squad is in there, some other people whose names you will recognize. If you don't see your representative's name, you can urge them to sign on. So the first day, now I'm going backwards to the first day that I was on my own before I joined the group. I took a bus to Bethlehem, and I began then seeing part of the infrastructure of control. This was a bus from Jerusalem to Bethlehem in the West Bank. You can see the barbed wire. You can see the settlements in the distance. You can see that you can view the lovely vista, but you can't get there. And you only have access to your bus stop, which has lettering only in Hebrew. Before the nation state law, Arabic was one of the official languages of Israel. It no longer is, it was demoted. So I saw this bus stop from my bus. this is an attempt to give you the sense that when you're speeding under the wall, the separation wall, it hovers above you. It kind of angles up at the top so that you feel quite surrounded. You can't, I couldn't get a good picture from the speeding bus, but it gives you the idea of being enclosed. When I was with the group, we toured some overlooks, and this is a picture of a Jewish-only road with a tunnel leading to a settlement. So the roads are segregated, and you can't get to the settlement from here if you're a Palestinian. Another view of a settlement. Here we are. This is another picture that I stole here because we viewed the wall in Jerusalem near a gas station and convenience store, but from where we were, you couldn't really see over. So I stole this picture too from the magazine Plus 972, where you get a better view of what's over the wall, what the wall is keeping you from. Also notice that my wall has the graffiti whited out. Walls are canvases, and many of them are decorated. So this wall you can see some other graffiti. While we were at the wall, we heard a buzzing in the sky, and it was bombers flying in formation to Gaza. This is not a picture that I could have taken on that day. They would have looked much tinier, I think, if tried to take them with my cell phone. So this is also a stolen picture, but it looked just like that. They were silver, and there were more of them, and they were in formation like geese migrating. And they were going to bomb Gaza. This was November 14th. You will probably remember that Israel did a targeted assassination of a Hamas, of a jihad leader. And there was reaction to the assassination. And so they bombed for a couple of days, and this is a summation of the losses. Killed, wounded, including children. So that was a vivid demonstration of the infrastructure of control. One of the things we did was tour a bunch of demolished Bedouin villages in the Negev. This is Israel proper. This is not the West Bank or Gaza, but Israeli territory, the Negev. And Israel is destroying houses in the Negev too. So these Bedouins are Israeli citizens, but you better not build a new house that's too ostentatious, visible. This is another village that is separated from the West Bank by a closed tunnel. Umar can open the door to let his children in and out as they go back and forth to school. But this is to keep the village in the Negev from the West Bank. And there's a camera up there, so he can't abuse his privilege with the tunnel. This is another Bedouin village. Abu Khaled didn't want his house to be destroyed. So he didn't want it to look new. So he went around collecting old stones from houses that had been demolished. And he built himself a new house that looked old to be sort of under the radar. And it's been standing for some years. So he has been successful so far. It's a beautiful house. It's a great structure. This is a Bedouin village that has been destroyed altogether, also in the Negev. And but they meet occasionally on the ground. They clean the cemetery. They mourn people who have just died. This is the Sheik of that town. It's a gathering of the village people. And one of the members of our group that traveled together is a Palestinian from Gaza, whose village has also been destroyed. So this is the Sheik singing to Ziyad. Then we went to Tel Aviv. And this is a map from Zokrat, the Omar al-Garbati's organization. And it has in it, the top part is a new sort of schematic picture of Yaffo. The photograph on the bottom is a picture of what the neighborhoods looked like. It was a thriving Palestinian community. You can see from the schematic drawing on the top that it isn't there anymore. That this artist has taken account of the fact that it's gone. Some Yaffo still exists, but Tel Aviv was built on the ruins of a lot of Yaffo. This is a wonderful park in Tel Aviv, sponsored by a British philanthropist, and there's a marker dedicating it to him. It is, you might say, a cemetery. It is built on the ruins of layers of Palestinian villages. It's a great park. We saw windsurfing and sailing and people biking and skating. But it has a history. So I said I'd get back to the nation state law. It says that only Jews have the right to exercise national self-determination. It establishes Hebrew as Israel's only official language. And it says that Jewish settlement is a national value. For many years, the United States has been saying that as a good faith part of negotiation for a two-state solution, Israel should cease and desist with the building of new settlements. They haven't, and the nation state law says that it's their mission not to. Now we turn to people trying to create inclusion rather than exclusion. So I'm calling Jeff Halper the hinge. A number of people in the Triangle know him because he has visited. He's an Israeli who is from Minnesota originally. And he's the founder of an organization called the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, which keeps track of what's being destroyed. He's also a founder of an organization called One Democratic State. So I find him an important hinge. And I saw him I knew that the tour wasn't going to get to him. So the second day when I was on my own, I made sure to visit with Jeff. So the first day I took the bus to Bethlehem. Second day I met Jeff. Here's an accounting from ICOD, the Committee Against House Demolitions. What's been demolished in 2019, April 2020, and since 1948. One of the reasons that Jeff is important to me, and I hope is important to Peace Action, is that his second book is on the next slide, so I'll show. Whoop. Where do I find his second book? Oh, there it is. War Against the People, Israel, the Palestinians, and the global pacification. It is a primer on militarization, not only of the United States, but also of Israel and the interlocking militaries between the two. So I think it's a really important book for peace activists. Here's material about the One Democratic State campaign. Its principle, its mission. Its principle that what we have been involved in, the supposed conflict between Israel and Israelis and Palestinians, has been a one-sided program of settling for colonizers. And it's attempting to recast the supposed conflict as if it were equal, a conflict between equals, as a colonial settler project. This is one of the other founders of, there are 90 founders of the One Democratic State campaign. This is a Palestinian, important politician, head of a party. And we visited him. And he and Jeff write together. They've done so several times. So I give their magazine article, and there was a webinar that had both of them, and I give you the information about that too. Ilan Pappé is an Israeli historian, another one of the founders of the One Democratic State campaign. Some of his books. And the fourth founder that I saw on this trip was Mazen Kumsia, the man sitting to my left. He was the purpose for my trip to Bethlehem. That's his wife, Catacorner, to him, and Catacorner to me is a British doctor who's volunteering at the Museum of Natural History that he founded. After some years as a scientist at Duke and then at Yale, he went back to Bethlehem. He was raised in Beit Zahor, and he founded a natural history museum at the University of Bethlehem. And he wrote a book too. he's written several, but I give you his one state book, Sharing the Land of Canaan. He's an important human rights activist and was before he became part of the founding of the ODS campaign. Bassem Tamimi is not a founder, but he's an important nonviolent activist, Palestinian on the West Bank, organizes demonstrations against the occupation. Miko has a podcast with him too, and I think I give that the reference next. But in the meantime, I thought I'd show you Bassem's dove. He was given an award by the Tunisian government for his nonviolent activism, and so they made a statue for him, presented it to him as an award. There's the podcast with Bassem. Now there is also a Zionist one-state plan. And I when I was talking about my trip in the ODS campaign that I explored when I was there, a friend of mine told me about this book. So I read it, I found it interesting, and I'm fascinated that there's a one-state plan on the other side. I believe she is part of the settler movement. I didn't know that when I first read her book, but I believe she is. She works for the David Horowitz Foundation. If you've been in the Triangle and you've been watching the attack against UNC and the Consortium for Middle East and Islamic Studies, some of it has been directed by the David Horowitz Foundation. They attack such things all over the country as being anti-Semitic and trying to delegitimize Israel. It's a fascinating book. It accomplishes some of what it accomplishes by jettisoning Gaza. She doesn't want Gaza as part of her one-state plan, but her idea, I think, is that Israel would just march in to the West Bank and push aside the Palestinian Authority and take over the government. And she thinks that it has some advantages for Palestinians. She thinks that many Palestinians prefer, like the Israeli democracy, and prefer it as a government, to the PA. And she provides polls to that effect. So she thinks that a number of Palestinians would welcome Israeli takeover and the end of the PA, at least in the West Bank. And she says that there are already 10,000 Israeli citizens in East Jerusalem. So they have showed their willingness to live as Israelis by going through the process to get vetted and get naturalized. The next book that I learned about after Glick's Israeli One State is Glick's Israeli One State is in Lustig's Paradigm Lost from Two-State Solution to One-State reality. He thinks the two-state solution is dead, no longer viable, as many do. And he's not calling his approach a one-state solution, but just dealing with what is already there. And one of the fascinating things about his book is that there are places that he touches some of the evidence that Caroline Glick presents also. One of his ideas is that there will be, when there's a more natural one state, there will be more collaboration between people on different sides. So that you will find odd bedfellows when people have the same sources, or at least the same sources, and maybe similar goals. So he cites polls also, not the same polls as Glick, but he also cites things attesting to the fact that Palestinians would prefer to be under Israel rather than under the PA. He cites a poll that from 2012 that there are a lot of Palestinians who don't want Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories for the sake of a peace. He too sees Palestinians approving of the democracy in Israel. He also clued me into the fact that there are serious right-wing proposals for annexation, with rights, along with conferring of citizenship rights on Palestinians who get annexed. So I have a reference to the document that he cites called The Leap of Faith. And I think with just the information in that slide, you could find that document, and it's easy to download. He also looks at the history of Israeli public opinion about the occupation and thinks that it's possible. Israel looks very right-wing now, but he thinks it's possible that there will be more and more who are in favor of more rights for Palestinians. There are interesting polls that cite a large percentage of Israelis who think the nation-state law should be fixed. When you talk about a one-state solution, it sounds so difficult to create, but that there are so many Palestinians so many Israelis who think that there's something wrong with the discriminatory nation-state law. In fact, there are about 24 or more laws that create the separation that we've been looking at. So they could be dismantled or changed one by one. And the nation-state law is certainly one of them. And with this framework, we have to look at the things that have been happening recently, because I think some of these sources help to make sense of them. For instance, the Israeli election on March 2nd, the results were stunning because the joint list, the conglomeration of Palestinian parties got many more votes than they have in the past. A lot of Palestinians have, even the Palestinian citizens of Israel have boycotted the elections because they don't feel so part of the country. And fewer boycotted this time. But also more Jews voted for the party. They're never going to be part of a government. You know, all this long attempt to create a government. Nobody has asked the Palestinian parties to be part of the government, and probably won't. But they are more and more powerful within the country. So that was an important moment. The Trump peace plan was an important moment. It was revealed in early February. And there were demonstrations among Palestinians. Who? The Palestinians in border towns who fear that the Trump plan would swap them out in a land swap and make them part of the PA, put them under the auspices of the Palestine Authority rather than the Israeli government. So this bears out what Glick said and what Lustig said about Palestinians approving of Israeli democracy. So Israel now says that it's planning to annex a large swath of the West Bank. They give themselves till July 2nd. And Pompeo showed up in Jerusalem on the 13th of May, just recently. And I have been, since last Wednesday, I've been to 4 webinars on annexation. People are taking notice. A lot of people have the impression that annexation is just fine with Trump, and that what Pompeo was doing over there was helping to make that happen. Most peace groups are resisting annexation. J Street, certainly. The webinar with Bashar Azza, who is a member of the PLO Advisory Council. They're against it. I also give you an article from Mondoweiss about the J Street leaders' response to annexation. And notice that he quotes Ian Lustig in his article. He also quotes Dennis Ross, who said that the two-state solution is not likely at the present time, and that one state for two peoples, one state for all its people, is much more likely. Interesting article. Here's one of the settlements that might get annexed. I stole this one. I think I stole this one from the magazine Plus 972, but I wasn't ever in a position to take that picture. These are 3 webinars from the Foundation of Middle East Peace. Wanted you to have that. reference. So in response to the New York Times article on how Pompeo was in Jerusalem to slow down annexation, I wrote this letter to the New York Times. I'm sequestered enough that I would have gotten their phone call if they had called to tell me they were going to publish it, which is their practice. But I never got the phone call, so I think it's not going to be published. But you can see that what I was doing was taking Jeff Halper's analysis of what's wrong with the way Israel usually does annexation. It usually offers Palestinians the right of permanent residency status. So Jeff analyzes what's wrong with permanent residency status, how it's really a trap for Palestinians. It doesn't actually guarantee permanent residency. And in fact, there are thousands of permanent residents of Jerusalem who have been pushed out, unable to live there again. So on the ICOD website, he has a little analysis of what that annexation would be. So I'm telling Pompeo, so far I haven't told Pompeo because his website doesn't seem to take comments about policies. I'm going to have to call or send it to him by mail. But I think this is a golden moment when we know that Israel wants something to tell them what we want in return, which is more rights for Palestinians. So a way of creating the one state solution, one democratic state, would be for Palestinians to get more solid rights, more citizenship rights, not be able to be expelled. I think it's long enough that we're not going to see this letter in the paper. So here are some images of living together. A book I heard about while I was there was Salman Abu Sita's Right of Return. He's a Palestinian demographer who says that who has studied the numbers carefully, and he says there's room if Palestinians who are in refugee camps and who are living elsewhere had the right, and who are within Israel had the right of return, there would be room for them with all the people living in Israel now. And I think, the way Glick talks about numbers of Palestinians, she wouldn't be surprised. She is not frightened of the demographic bomb that many people are afraid of. So she might not be surprised to know that there's room for returnees. I haven't met him. Awad Abdel Fattah knows him, and it has been recommended to ICOD and Miko that they have podcasts or webinars with him. So maybe we'll be able to hear him more closely. I saw a lot of pines. We were driving around. I saw a lot of pines from the road. Some of you may remember that as children, you were asked to contribute coins to buy trees for Israel. I was. My mother was. We were given little metal blue and white boxes and told to put coins in them. And we did, to buy trees for Israel. Well, these are some of the trees. They are a non-native species of pine tree, and they were built over destroyed Palestinian villages. So there are lots of patches of pines. throughout Israel. Here are pines, lots of pines there, lots of pines there. So you can see that that Abu Sita has ideas about where new housing for returnees, Palestinian returnees, might be able to go. Because many of the destroyed villages weren't built on. They were planted over. So here's another vision of living together. I don't have a picture, but this is an intentional mixed town, Palestinians and Israelis, called Oasis of Peace, both in Arabic and in English, in the Hebrew rather. People who want to show that it's possible to live together, and so they founded a village to do so. If I go back, I'll go there. I'll try to visit there. And then there's a little mixed village happening in Jerusalem because the Israelis have leased some hotels to house victims of the coronavirus who have recovered but not ready to walk right back into their pre-COVID lives. And so they're living in hotels in various places. And one of them has a group of people who have named themselves, renamed the hotel, Hotel Corona. And they are celebrating their religions together, dancing together, eating together, talking together, and they're filming themselves so that their experience is getting shared. So I have this article from NPR and an article from the Israeli magazine Plus 972 for another vision of people living together. Conclusions, questions, comments? I say there are ways to get greater equality for the diverse populations in the Holy Land. And we've seen a few glimmers of hope that it might be achievable. There are things for us who don't live there, pursuing boycott, divestment and sanctions, supporting the One Democratic State campaign, and trying to shape annexation, which is on its way. So now let me hear from you. And if you want to see any of more pictures of the places that we've seen, let me know.
All right, so Judith, it might be easier if you stop screen sharing.
Yes.
And that way I'll put you a little more forward.
Nope. Didn't want that.
I think up at the top of your screen where it says you are sharing in the middle. See that? Actually, how about I do it? There we go.
Great.
All right. So are there questions that folks have for Judith about her trip or things she's seen or the people that she's met? can either contribute it in the chat box or see if we can find faces.
I just want to thank Judith.
Indeed.
Thank you for having me, sponsoring me, bringing me to all over, to Raleigh and parts beyond.
So Judith, is Miko Peled is he supporting the one-state solution?
Yes, he is. That's why he wanted us to meet all of these founders. And Bassem Mimi, who is not a founder, but is a supporter.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was going to mention that my hope is to be able to make a recording, an audio recording and a video recording of this available if anybody wants to be able to go back through it. And with Judith's permission, we could make a copy of the slides available so that if you wanted to be able to reference any of the books and so forth that she mentioned.
You were also thinking of putting it on YouTube.
That is a likely way that the video will be shared.
So people will see the slides.
Yes, assuming that I've done the recording correctly, which we're going to hope that worked correctly.
Oh, let's assume.
Let's assume. Yeah, and we'll be able to make that available. I haven't exactly figured out where, but it will certainly be have links available on Highland United Methodist Church's website, as we've sort of helped to host this evening. But certainly Joe Burton and Judith will know how to let people know where to find information.
I'll publicize that on to the people that are on our email list that come to the third Tuesday. And I want to remind everybody that this is part of the Highlands Micah 6/8 Peace with Justice group. We sponsor this every third Tuesday of the month. This is the first one we've had since the shutdown, and I'm not sure where we're going from here, but we may try this again. But it's been very, very interesting, and I thank you, Judith, for your presentation.
I was delighted to be invited. Thank you very much for sheltering me under the wings of Peace Action and the church. The church has been great.
It was very, very good. Enjoyed it very much.
Good.
Can I say something?
Anyone can say something.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm Mike Ross. I live in Raleigh. Member of the Jewish community. And I felt your presentation was very one-sided and gave a narrative that was dismissive of the concerns of Jews who worry about their security and did not present why they feel that way. And everything they did was based on malign intentions or was portrayed that way. I thought it was extremely one-sided. And to suggest that Jews should give up the one place where they feel safe in the Middle East begs the question, where should the Jews who were kicked out of the Arab lands go back to, or where might they feel safe? And do you think they would feel safe living in an area where they didn't control their security?
I spent a lot of time on intifadas and talked about Miko's history of being a bereaved family member. I didn't slight violence against Israeli Jews.
Is that the only thing that you can say.
Well, that was the first thing I said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You had a bunch of accusations and questions.
I spent the last hour listening to accusations against a democracy with inaccurate facts. But I'll let you speak. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I didn't hear what you were getting at. Something about Israeli democracy, but I don't know what. I said that it was admired. If there is a one democratic state, I'm assuming that it will continue to be a place where people will be safe.
Can you name one such state in the Middle East today?
Where it has already happened?
Where ethnicities are living in peace?
Well, the places the famous places that it happened only under strong authoritarian control, and it got destroyed. When the heavy hand of tyranny released it. So we have more models of countries dividing now than countries coming together. But in fact, people were, I am constantly told that people were living happily together early on in the history of the state. I have friends now who fled from the Nazis to Israel, early Israel, and got along fine with Palestinians, and many Jews, when the Jewish migration first began, moved into Palestinian villages. I mean, they weren't creating new villages, creating new settlements. They were.
I've not seen documentation of that, of what you say, moving into Palestinian villages there were a sizable number of people moving into Palestinian villages and living securely, you're saying? I'm not aware of that.
Yes, well, Ilan Pape talks about it. And in fact,
I would not say that he is a reliable historian. He's a very, very biased man. We all know that.
He has views.
Yes, he does.
But I don't know that he's a bad historian.
I can't argue. I'm not going to argue because we don't have that.
We don't have the footnotes.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's happening now that there's a certain amount of intermixing. And
so,
I assume that if there were one state, there would be more. And that you wouldn't need so many walls and checkpoints. There are 150 checkpoints now, and these signs that tell you can't visit.
So there is no country in the Middle East that you can point to, and yet you're taking a place where there's been such hated conflict for over a century and saying they'll mix together and they'll find peace. And you're instilling by arguing about the malfeasance of Israel, I don't think you're laying a proper groundwork for peace. You're projecting a reason for conflict. And I wish you wouldn't use the moniker of peace-seeking, because it's not peace-seeking that you're encouraging. You're encouraging more conflict when you make accusations and excuses for resistance. You named Tamimi as a peace activist. His family is riddled with terrorists. Has he
Can we stop with name calling at the moment?
What name calling?
Can you calm down for a second? You've been talking, as far as I can tell, nonstop for the last 15, 20 minutes, making accusations. Now, look, Judith comes to this, I've known Judith for years, from a perspective that what you have in Israel is a situation of oppression. You have a settler colonial society, and it's oppressive. Now, you don't buy that, and it's not a joke.
No, it's not a joke, but you don't hear yourself. You're so accusatory.
What do you mean? Okay,
about the whole society.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Okay, was the United States founded as a settler colonial society? Did the United States commit atrocities against Native Americans?
Yes, it did.
Did the United States steal the land, essentially, or the English settlers steal the land from its native settlers? Now tell me, what relevant way is what Jewish Zionists from Europe did in between the 1880s and 1948 and after, in what relevant way is it different from what the English settlers did to Native Americans, what the Australians did? Now, is it accusatory? Am I being anti-American when I say that?
So let me ask you something. If Native Americans came back to a territory where no country lived, where no country had jurisdiction and wanted to settle there, would you be opposed to that?
Not settle there, but look, there are lots of issues here. Lots of issues here. One issue is, where do people get to settle? Another issue is, what kinds of rights of sovereignty do people get? Now, look, nobody is asking all those Jews from the Arab lands, all the Jews that came from Europe, nobody is asking Israeli Jews, the one-state people, are not saying they can't live there anymore. That would be absurd. Even though their ancestors may have come and stolen the land, if somebody came here and told me I can't live in my house, I wouldn't go for that either. But the question is, do I have sovereignty over these people? There are Palestinians that live there now and that lived there a short while ago. Why can't they live there too and everyone have equal rights? What's wrong with that?
Well, the land was not stolen by and large. It was bought. Now, you may not like the idea that...
First of all, that's bullshit history. It's bullshit history. It was, of course, stolen. 90% of it was stolen. There was a very small amount. By the time of the partition resolution, Jews outright owned about 6% of the land. The partition of 47 allotted them 55% of the land. And what gave them sovereignty over 450,000 Palestinians who were going to be denationalized. It was not a fair deal. And even the land that was bought, there were many, many sharecroppers on that land who had been there for generations and were kicked off.
What?
Now, come on. You talk about history, learn the goddamn history.
What percentage of land, you said 6% was owned by Jews?
Yeah, approximately.
What percent was owned by Arabs?
That's an interesting question because, of course, we're talking about an Ottoman tradition that doesn't have traditional land ownership.
Okay, so what's the answer?
But in terms of communal ownership and settling and cultivating, the vast majority of the land belongs.
Can I just jump in and say one thing? In the partition plan that came to the United Nations in November of 1947, that land that was dedicated for the Jews was all bought. That partition, the land in 1947,
wasn't all bought.
If that part was bought, then when
55% of the land was given, a lot of it was held by the British Mandate power. A lot of it was common land, and the Jewish forces that became Israel took it over.
No, the partition back, there were no Jewish forces in 1947.
Now what people have to do is you have to go back and actually look in the history books. I mean, we're not going to settle this right now.
Do you agree in one fact that the Arab countries rejected the partition plan of November of 1947, and they attacked Israel in May of 1948? Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Yes,
okay, wars have consequences.
But listen, are we going to actually argue percentages of land and what got bought and what didn't? I mean, this seems really,
Judith, if you go back to my comments, I commented throughout your talk. I'm hoping you can read some of those comments. I'd love to have an email discussion with you.
Okay.
But wars have consequences. When the Arabs attacked Israel in 1948, that part of the land that the Israelis did take was Arab land. And about 750,000 Palestinians were pushed out of their land.
Yes, that's a good number.
At the same time, 750,000 Jews were pushed out of Arab land.
And they came.
Israel.
I mean, some of them came voluntarily to Israel because Israel really wanted
that all has the ring of truth.
Increase their
What he
population.
just said.
And furthermore, Israel did some terrorism to scare them out of their homes in the Arab countries.
Correct.
We're getting.
Some of the Palestinians who lost their land inside of Israel had been fighting with Jews against the invaders from outside. I know that because I've met some. But there's a lot of detailed facts that I don't think that we would be able to resolve tonight. But I have a parable that I would like to share with Judith, and I call it the parable of the two Josephs.
Okay, who's talking right now?
This is me, Marsh. Hi, Judith.
Oh yes.
Okay, and I live in Boylan Heights, and I have two neighbors named Joseph, and we're all buddies, and we're all Democratic activists, and we're all about the same age, 70 years old, and one Joseph spent all his summers in the 1960s playing capture the flag in Jewish summer camps in the Catskills. And the other Joseph spent all his summers working on various kibbutzes in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And they grew up and they went to college and became Democratic activists and changed some of their views. Which one do you think became the strong anti-Zionist?
Well, I don't know.
Anybody care to hazard a guess?
If it's going to be counterintuitive, I guess the kibbutz guy.
That's right. Because what he saw in the way that the Israeli settlers treated the Palestinians, he said, all in the countryside all around the kibbutz were depopulated Arab villages and farms, and the Arabs were forced to report at night in a concentration camp in town, and that's where they slept every night. But they were allowed to come out during the day and work and participate in the economy, but they were generally brutalized. That was his experience working on more than one kibbutz in the 1960s. So he's a very strong anti-Zionist. But the other Joseph, who spent his summer playing capture the flag in the Catskills in the 60s, no, he's a strong supporter of the Israeli government today. And we all agree on everything else, about the Democratic Party and, get rid of Trump, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, that's the parable of the two Josephs.
I want to thank everybody for your participation. It's 8:30 and it's time to quit. I want to thank Janet for being with us tonight, and thank all of you for coming.
Yeah.
And
Many
thank you.
thanks to Janet.
And thank you, Judith, very much. And it was an interesting conversation, but we've run out of time. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Judith.
Bye-bye.
Bye.